Welcome to the CANIE Climate Dialogues. This is the podcast at the intersection of international education and climate action. I'm CJ Tremblay, and today we've got a great episode for you. But in case you missed the last one, and I can't imagine that you did, right? You definitely 100% listened to it. In case you missed it, because it's been busy, in our last episode, we talked to CANIE founders Ailsa Lamont and P. Tulia Nakula to just talk about all things CANIE. If you're new here and you're just starting to join us, you still got time to catch up. You're only a couple episodes behind. So you can hop on to the last episode to learn about CANIE, which is the Climate Action Network for International Educators. And in that episode, we talked about why our two founders started this organization, how, when, what made it all come together, and what the vision for the future is for our sector. So on today's episode, we've got the leaders of two organizations that are counterparts on the opposite sides of the planet. The Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed, also known as AASHE, and the Australian Campuses Towards Sustainability, ACTS. AASHE primarily works in North America, and as the name suggests, ACTS works in Australasia. So this discussion that you're going to hear touches on so many aspects of international and climate action. We talk about global problem solving, the future of travel in the sector, how we do business, studying online, capacity building, and so much more. So much so that I could talk about it and prep you for it, but I'm actually just going to leave you with the fact that it was, once again, a surprisingly hopeful conversation, given the challenges of the last 10 months, both for our sector, but also just like on a global scale for humanity. In the face of so much tragedy and difficulties, what our guests leave us with are a great deal of hope and a great deal of sort of inspiration. I'm really excited for you to hear it. Another really fun thing about today is that today's CANIE Co-Host is one of CANIE's founding members, Adrienne Fusek. I love her. She's incredible, and she's got so much to add to this discussion. Adrienne has worked in international education for 16 years and is currently the Director of Global Education and Partnerships at San Diego State University. And you'll hear a little bit more about her story, but Adrienne got into the field because of her undergraduate study abroad experience in Mexico. Her bachelor's degree is from Humboldt State University, where she's got a master's in international education from SIT Graduate Institute and a doctor of education from San Diego State. So Adrienne brings it all the time, everything that she does. She served as the Peace Corps volunteer in Bangladesh, where she taught English at a women's college. She has also taught English to speakers of other languages at South Puget Sound Community College and at an adult literacy nonprofit organization in Washington State. Adrienne also did the same climate reality leader training that she was one of my cohort buddies, and she did the climate reality leader training and the online edition in July last year. So as you can see, Adrienne's credentials speak for themselves. She's amazing. I've had the privilege of working with her for nearly a year now and can confirm she's incredibly committed and passionate and smart and empathetic and thoughtful and a bunch of my favorite and flattering adjectives. And we are so lucky to have her on the board of CANIE. And so with that very impressive track record officially, I guess, while on the record, I'm so excited for you, our listeners, and now friends, to get to meet her. There she is. Adrienne,
hello.
Welcome to the pod. How are you?
I am doing great. I feel, doing really, really well. Thanks for inviting me to co-host with you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, are you kidding me? You're a powerhouse. I'm so excited that you're here. It's your first of many. It's our first pod together, which is exciting for me. I think the world of you, hence the embarrassingly glowing introduction. Can you believe it's our little nonprofit has a podcast and people are listening to it, which is cool.
People are listening. People love it. People love CANIE. It's brilliant. I love it. And thanks to you, you're the powerhouse behind all of this and coordinating and all of getting the people to do the tech and everything and make it super professional. It's so wonderful to be a part of this organization, especially it's inspiring to work with you because of what I'm able to see you do. I'm standing back watching. I'm like, wow, this woman is amazing. So, you say all this great stuff about me, but it's like, come on, CJ. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about you again. That's my comfort zone. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. How'd you come to be an international? How'd you come to be with CANIE?
Yeah. Okay. So I think a lot of people who work in international ed, it's kind of a common story that they studied abroad or, they met somebody who was studying abroad as an international student. It just changed their world. So I was in undergrad studying Spanish, and I just took Spanish because it was fun. It was the one class I really enjoyed, but I was always majoring in all these other things. So I just took Spanish because I liked it. So I studied abroad in Mexico. I lived there for a year, and I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I cracked this code. I could speak this language, and this entire part of the world opened up to me in terms of communicating and having conversations and really understanding nuances with language and the meaning of words and the culture and just kind of the depth of being abroad for a year and living with families and that kind of thing. So that's how I got into international ed. And you kind of, read the rest in my bio, but so as long as I can remember, I've always been kind of overly passionate about sustainability and the climate. And, the terminology has changed a lot over the years, appropriate technology and I don't know, just a lot of people just say, okay, you're my hippie friend, whatever. I'm that person who never buys a plastic bag, but when a plastic bag ends up in my kitchen, I wash it and reuse it and wash it and reuse it until I can't reuse it anymore. And then I put it in another bag, and then I wait until I have enough bags, and then I go recycle it. So it's
Amazing.
That's just kind of my life. And I just can't pinpoint when, I got involved or engaged in sustainability. But contrarily, I guess, I don't even know if that's a word, I love the field of international education, and I love the profound transformational benefits of being in a different culture and just the benefits of international ed. And so I've sort of lived with this, and I've described it this way a number of times. I've lived with this cognitive dissonance for such a long time with I love international ed, yet, and the travel, obviously that's part of that. Yet I really care deeply about the planet. And I know that with educational travel, there's the climate emissions that are associated with that. So I just kind of lived with that, it's been inside of me. And I remember over a decade ago at a conference talking to a friend, colleague about how we need to start an organization to address international education and sustainability, basically. How we just need to make that happen. But, that didn't happen. We, the day-to-day took over. So, I'm sitting in my office about a year ago, and I see this email come through the SECUS listserv, kind of introducing CANIE, oh, there's this new organization. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? My heart starts pumping. And so I dig deeper on their website, and I see that the founding members include this guy, Eddie West, who happened to just be hired. I know, one of my heroes.
We're big Eddie West fans on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. So he happened to be hired by San Diego State University and was just in the building next door. Wow. And so I swear I wanted to just close down my computer and run down the hallways being Eddie, you complete me. How is this? Oh my God, you're making
serendipity, perfect. Right?
Yeah. And so he looped me in with Elsa and Petulia, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's, you know, when you like find your people and you find
Yeah.
like this common cause that drives you, and like the intersection of like being deeply passionate about creating global citizens and the international competencies and the richness that comes with that. And also being like deeply passionate about the planet. Like it's, I mean, that's so simple. Like you see, like, I care about the planet. It's like, yeah, that's actually not as common as you would think,
Right.
as like a priority in the environment in which I exist, wanting to, and that cognitive dissonance. I mean, we talk about this all the time. And I'm sure that that's going to come up today in our conversations. So thank you for introducing yourself. You are going to be a frequent co-host of our CANIE Co-Host of the sort of CANIE Climate Dialogues. And so I'm
Awesome.
I'm eager for the audience and our listeners to get to be huge Adrienne fans as I am.
Oh my gosh.
So very exciting. But yeah, we've got a super great episode today. Feel like maybe jumping into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we are going to, I'm going to introduce Meghan and Corey, and then, yeah, we'll welcome them to the screen. All right. So Meghan is the executive director at AASHE. We're so glad she's joining us today. She's been with the organization since 2009. And before her current role, she previously held the positions of director of programs and STARS program manager. Very cool program. We're going to talk about that later. Prior to AASHE, Meghan worked as a sustainability specialist at Nelson, where she provided sustainability expertise and consulting services to various clients. She also spent over 5 years working at the U.S. Green Building Council, where, as manager of community, she developed and managed a local chapter network for building industry professionals and helped create Emerging Green Builders program that integrates students and young professionals into the green building movement. Meghan also worked as the environmental educator for the University at Buffalo Green office, organizing campus and community education focused on energy conservation, green building, and sustainable living. She holds a bachelor's degree in social sciences with concentrations in environmental studies and health and human services from the University at Buffalo, a master's degree in organization management and development from Fielding Graduate Institute, and a certificate in massage therapy from the Potomac Massage Training Institute. So like just a little bit of everything, and incredibly like deep sort of expertise. So we're super glad she's here. And Corey. So Corey has worked at the University of Tasmania since 2009. Managing the sustainability team, and is charged with advancing the holistic organizational sustainability agenda. He served on the University of Tasmania's governing council from 2012 to 2020 and is the current president of Australasian Campuses Towards Sustainability Acts. He has also served on the board of several community organizations, including Sustainable Living Tasmania for 10 years, 5 of which where he was president, is a graduate of the Tasmanian Leaders Program, and has joint master's degrees in environmental science and public administration. He also spent 16 years supporting science in Antarctica before immigrating to Tasmania. So thank you so much to you both, incredibly impressive people. Thank you so much for taking the time and making the time to be here with us. Welcome. Meghan, Corey, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being here. How's it going?
It's great to be here.
It's very exciting to be here, and thanks for those lovely introductions.
Listen, Corey, it's super nice to see you again. The last time actually I saw you, you were a panelist at the CANIE Summit. And I was just rewatching that last night in preparation for this. And I actually didn't get a chance to tell you this because we didn't talk much around that time. But I really loved the like contextualized UN SDGs, the way you had sort of what you'd shared about how 4 of them that were anchored as like the biosphere goals, which is where climate exists, the climate action, and then the 8 societal goals, the 4 economic goals, sort of those tiers all being like anchored at the top by the partnerships, which is something that we will definitely be talking about today. So for those of you who are listening, if you haven't had a chance to watch that, it was the CANIE Summit in New Zealand and Australia that we did in May. And so that's on YouTube. And so that was great. And Meghan, reconnecting. I did promise you that I would invite you on the podcast when we talked last.
I appreciate the invitation.
So this is great. I'm so glad. I was like, don't say sure, of course, I'd love to do something unless you're willing, because I will ask you.
Totally willing.
This is great. Awesome. So we have a whole heck of a lot to get into and to talk about today. So I'm going to just jump right in. Yeah, Adrienne, good?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So for the listeners who don't know yet, I know we talked a lot about you and your introductions, but would love to share with our listeners who maybe aren't super familiar with AASHE and ACTS, if you could each give us a quick introduction of your organization and what it does. So Meghan, if you can sort of take it away with AASHE, tell us a little bit about it.
Sure thing, happy to. So AASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, quite a mouthful, but AASHE is a nonprofit membership organization that supports anyone in higher education working on sustainability. So what that means is we have faculty, staff, students, anyone who's really trying to help their institution advance sustainability goals or learning about sustainability in higher ed. We provide resources and tools to help them not just understand more about sustainability, but advance sustainability action on their campus. And because sustainability lives in different places on campuses, and what I mean by that is there are directors of sustainability that might be housed in facilities. There might be a sustainability coordinator in student affairs. There might be a faculty member that's leading sustainability. Given all of those various roles and the fact that sustainability change agents are everywhere on campuses, we're trying to provide a lot of different tools and, again, opportunities for those folks to learn more, learn from other institutions, and better advance sustainability. In a nutshell, that's who we are and what we do.
That's a very concise nutshell.
I tried.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, Corey, tell us a bit about ACTS.
Well, ACTS is Australasian Campuses Towards Sustainability. So we're a regional body that I could just say ditto and keep it even more succinct. Very much through our partnerships with AASHE and the AUC in the UK and Ireland. Same broad goals, same broad approaches. We share tools we share resources across one another to enable everybody in our institutions, whether, as Meghan said, they're in facilities, they're in curriculum, they're in research, it's everybody, and we try to have resources for everybody. The main thing I think that we all do, and I'll just drive home what Meghan had said, it's a holistic approach. We want people to understand that sustainability doesn't just exist in one of those areas. If you're actually going to advance sustainability, it has to sort of be across all those areas at the end of the day.
I'll just add, of course, because there's always more to say about our work. So AASHE's mission that I'm sure aligns very closely with ACTS's is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the sustainability transformation. So while operations and energy vital to sustainability, as one of my former board members used to say, what happens inside the buildings of higher education institutions is arguably even more important. So it's recognizing that the impact that higher ed has really is the graduates. And let me try and remember, another member of ours said, let's make sure that higher education's worst emissions are not their graduates. So the flip side of that and the more positive side of that is how are we making sure, and I think ACTS, AASHE, our partners throughout the world are really trying to ensure that any graduate is equipped with the knowledge, the tools, the skills that they need to be able to advance sustainability thinking and sustainability solutions, regardless of their career path.
And just to build on that a little bit as well, there's that sense of most of our higher education institutions are anchors in their communities. And so in addition to the graduates going out is in embodying the principles of a sustainable organization and showcasing that in your local communities, and upskilling your tradies that come in and do works, utilities people, etc. So it's that broader impact as well.
So I just kind of want to dig in a little bit deeper. So what I heard, and I just want to explore a little bit, is that AASHE and AACS, along with other organizations with similar missions, are coordinating and working together and sharing resources. Did I get that right? That's
Indeed.
such an inspiration.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's actually.
And it isn't just the three that I named up. There's
Right.
CAGI, there's which is based in Japan. There's a South Korean equivalent. There's the China Green University Network that we work a lot with in our regional approach. So there's lots of these bodies around, and we do as much as we can to interact with one another. Now we virtually attend conferences and welcomes and provide resource access and get that back from them. Because sustainability is contextual. It is going to be different
Right.
for different communities, different nations, etc. But at the core of it, there's some basic concepts, but how those are applied and prioritized in different regions, we can learn from.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful connection to international education, and kind of bringing this all together, because to address any major issue, you're going to need the international collaboration and the diverse mindsets and stuff. So that's really wonderful to learn that about both or all of the organizations and the kind of moving the higher ed or post-secondary education forward. So both AASHE and AACS have been around for quite some time. I believe AASHE, and correct me if I'm wrong, Meghan, for about 15 years and AACS for 20 or so. And so CANIE, we're just a baby. We were just born pretty much last year. And so we're really interested in hearing from both of you as more mature organizations have had the chance to look back at your organization's history and the impact that your work has had, and the achievements that you've made. So in your opinion, what's the biggest impact that your organization, both of you, have brought to the higher education landscape?
Corey, you go first.
Okay, thanks, Meghan. So within the Australasian Pacific region, we brought the story together across a number of institutions that started this some 20 years ago, that were leading in this space, that had started to talk about environmental sustainability and how it's a broader issue than that. It's social sustainability, et cetera. And so a small group came together and said, okay, how do we empower this story and this understanding to start to be found in all of our institutions of higher education? And that became the mission, really. And so we would find champions in various institutions, anywhere within the institution, and invite them in and say, we need to work together, to the point where we've got to today. We have 100% of the New Zealand higher education institutions are members. Wow. And we're at 90% in Australia. We're hoping to maintain that with COVID budget cuts. Has been really harsh on the sector. So lots of people losing their jobs and such. So if we can maintain membership, that would be great, because we are there to empower and embolden people in those institutions, and that helps that mission stay current and prioritized. And again, it isn't just us doing that. We're providing a service. It's students demanding that. So we're finding that in our surveys of students that we support through AACS, the international surveys, our own surveys in Australasia, even at my own institution, students are demanding and saying how important sustainability is for their future careers. They want authenticity. They don't want, they name up greenwashing, lip service stuff nonstop. I get it all the time still. And I'm defending, things that we're trying to do, and which is good, because it pushes the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Adrienne, because it, reflecting back on AASHE as like the older organization always feels hilarious to me, because it still feels like we're the little nonprofit that could, right, Corey? Yep. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to reflect back, because I think when I think about when AASHE was created, we sort of grew out of a regional network in the Pacific Northwest of the US, and it all started around sharing resources. And this was really now going on 20 years ago, when there were these positions, Director of Sustainability, starting to pop up, but they were not so prevalent So people were starting to share resources, and how are you doing this? And how are you doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory? And do you have a green building policy? And very much like facilities or sort of more built environment type questions really being raised. So really at our core, we brought people together. We're convener. We were trying to say, all right, let's just all get in a room together. And that's really, we started doing a conference, probably, this is before my time, but probably 2005, maybe 2006. Again, just bringing people together, saying like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And soon after that, and this connects with not just the role that we play, but I think the impact that we have had. We're very similar to other professional associations. We provide resources, professional development opportunities, things like that. But I'd say a key differentiator, especially in the United States, is that we have the STARS tool, Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System. And STARS is created by higher ed for higher education. And it was created sort of using LEED as a little bit of a model of like, okay, LEED sort of set out to define this is what a green building looks like, again, at least from the US perspective. There are other systems throughout the world. But we were trying to figure out, as sustainability in higher education was sort of evolving and really taking shape, a lot of the folks in our community were like, we need a consistent way to measure sustainability in higher education. AASHE, we think you should do that. And that was sort of how STARS was created. And I mean, we launched STARS over a decade ago. So now at this point in time, 1,000 institutions have been using STARS to measure their progress towards sustainability. And while it's hard to like really capture the impact, because so much of our impact is sort of like bundled up in like, oh, well, this is about, it's just a little bit convoluted to be able to report. But here's the thing, is the impact that I can share is the stories that I've heard, the qualitative information around. STARS helped us understand the breadth and depths of sustainability. STARS helped us understand that sustainability is not just about energy, waste, and water, et cetera. So in any event, Adrienne, again, I appreciate the opportunity to reflect back. And I think, well, at our core, where we started and what we do today is still convene sustainability change agents through conferences, et cetera. And I think STARS has become sort of like the really, frankly, I think probably the most important thing that AASHE's done in terms of impact.
It's so interesting for me to hear that STARS was born out of a need identified from post-secondary ed. They're saying, hey, we need consistency. We need a way to report. And, for AASHE to step in and take that on, I mean, that's monumental.
It was a big task.
Yeah, I know we talked about this before. I am very excited for a future episode where we literally just like deep dive into STARS and how it crosses over specifically with international. I think there's so much we can do, but I think we're still very much at a high level. But like, consider this your official invitation to have AASHE represented another time.
Absolutely.
To talk STARS for sure.
Yeah.
And I can come back and talk about it as well. Sorry, Megan, because there's another example, Adrienne, of the sharing. AASHE's been incredibly generous and hosted a special cohort of groups in our region. So through AASHE partnership, of which University of Tasmania, where I work, was one of the original 6 universities signing up to do STARS in our region. And University of Tasmania got the first STARS rating in our region of the planet, which is pretty exciting. And that has driven tremendous change, not just in my organization, and my role has changed here significantly, where I was a sustainability manager in facilities 6 months ago, and now I'm the sustainability mission integrator, which is an official title of associate director of sustainability, driving us to get a gold rating by the end of this year and platinum by the end of 2024. So this STARS as a tool that has been developed by and shared, and we are now represented on the STARS steering committee. So one of my staff members and an AASHE board member, fellow board member, is represented on the steering committee to ensure that we get regionalization of STARS and recognition to make sure it is an international tool. That it just broadens its perspective as well. But that's just another example of how organizations coming together and sharing resources and approaches and making them better. And CANIE joining this group of organizations working together is fantastic. You know, I participated with CANIE with AASHE when I helped staff a stall at the Australian International Education Conference in Western Australia last year, and you know it's just grown from there. And so we're very much here to support you as a relatively newer organization, understanding that you are also very passion-based and mission-focused and volunteer-based, which is at the end of the day how all of our organizations really move forward, and we just get resources and share resources where we can.
Right. Thank you. That's important to us for sure. Do your organization do a lot of government advocacy work to promote green standards in higher ed? And what do you see are the differences in terms of responses or engagement in North America versus Australasia?
Go
you want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, so AASHE does not do a lot of advocacy, and it is not because we don't think it's absolutely critical and vitally important. It is because we don't have the capacity, the expertise, or the resources. So that's on the to-do list once we do have more resources, capacity, and expertise.
But you do it by example.
Well, and here's the thing.
I was at a conference where you got a standing ovation for canceling a conference based on social sustainability principles. Oh, sorry, not canceling a conference, moving a conference to another state based on social sustainability principles. And I tell you what, that feeling in that room was just so emotionally powerful to know that there was a representative organization stepping up and saying, yeah, no, this is, we may not advocate directly to government policy, but boy, we'll tell you when we don't agree with it.
It's a really important distinction because frankly, in terms of like advocating for particular legislation at a national level, AASHE does very little of. We support organizations that do that work. We do sign-on letters and are definitely play more of a supportive role. But what Corey's talking about in terms of advocating for sustainability, and again, sustainability and the breadth and depth of sustainability. And for the past several years, AASHE has been working to center racial equity and social justice in everything that we do. And especially given the past 4 years have been incredibly divisive within the United States. And violence against Black and Brown Americans only continues to increase. I would say what Corey's referencing is back in 2017, after a number of different things happened, there was discriminatory legislation passed in Texas. And we had our conference in Texas that year, meaning like it passed in June, our conference was in October. And we were distraught about it. We were absolutely distraught. And but we couldn't pull out. We would have paid anyways. And again, we're the little nonprofit that could, like baby CANIE is, right? So we were like, ugh. So we acknowledged, we were like, we don't want to go to any place in the future where everyone doesn't feel comfortable. And because back in the day when we used to travel, remember travel? Anyways, back when that used to happen, we used to plan our conference locations more than a year in advance. Right. So it was like we would announce at the end of the present year conference, this is where we're going to be next year. It was very exciting. Well, amidst us being in a place where it was really challenging for us to be in Texas after this discriminatory legislation took place and we couldn't do anything about it. And we had already signed one contract for the following year to be in St. Louis, Missouri. This was 2017. And in August of 2017, the NAACP, for the first time in their 100+ year existence, issued their first ever travel advisory, saying that it is unsafe for people of color to travel to the state of Missouri. So in the context of, we had been in Texas, discriminatory legislation plays, now we're supposed to be going to St. Louis, which is a city that has such great social movement happening amidst absolute horrors and atrocity. Essentially what Corey is referencing is our board of directors and myself voted unanimously to cancel our contract, which was a $45,000 hit to us as an organization, and make sure that we could go to a location where everyone felt safe to be able to go. So we do some advocacy, Adrienne, to answer your question.
Yeah, and
Wow.
just, yeah, so sorry, I'm digressing there in a way. So AASHE works with a number of other Australasian bodies. So there's this body called Universities Australia, and they do a lot of government policy advocacy work. So we have a relationship with them, partnership with a group within that organization that we feed in sustainability related things that we would love them to advocate on. We're the I guess subject matter experts, so we give them information and then they go do advocacy because that's their role within the university sector. So we do it, but we do it indirectly. We have talked at a board level many times. It's embedded into our strategies, but once again, as Meghan said, it's capacity. I mean, we essentially have 1.8 full-time equivalent staff. We're membership-based, dues from universities. The board's all volunteer and does all sorts of things. So it is a capacity issue. So we do what we can where we can. And again, as we've talked about through this entire podcast, it's partnering and sharing and working together that we can actually make some changes.
And Corey,
Right.
I just want to reinforce sort of the important distinction that you made, because we both represent organizations of individuals who are doing advocacy work every single day, right? As sustainability change agents on campuses, that is their role, is advocating for sustainability. So it is particular to sort of the legislative piece where AASHE in particular is less involved. But again, I'd say we're less proactive there. We're very supportive. But in terms of, supporting change agents, we're advocating on a daily basis for sure.
Right.
So thanks for that distinction, Corey. It's an important one.
Okay.
In terms of,
Go ahead. Go, Adrienne.
thank you. In terms of organizational growth and membership, have you seen that it has kind of been steady over the years, or have you seen an increase more recently as, climate, the climate crisis has become, more and more, I guess, less of an arguing point, something that we can kind of agree on?
That's a good one, Adrienne, because I touched on it earlier about our membership and the fact that we're maintaining membership in this current environment and maintaining involvement in our programs such as Green Impact, which we brought over from the National Union of Students in the UK. The fact that we're maintaining activity in those spaces and that membership tells me that there is seen value in maintaining that participation. And that therefore AASHE is being successful. That's how I'm taking it as a KPI, that we aren't dropping members. Yes, there are staff losing their jobs in these teams that we support, which is terrible. But they have all pointed out that in order for them to have any of that possibility of advocacy and change in their organization, they need to maintain that membership in AASHE and run our programs and work with us and other people at other institutions. So they're able to say our membership in that sharing of resources and sharing of information enables us to continue to do it in a leaner way, not as many of us getting paid to do it, but we still need to do it.
Yeah, I would say I'm incredibly envious of the membership stats of AASHE. And the reality is just the metrics are just so different, right? So within the United States and AASHE, the bulk of our members are within the US and Canada, though the STARS program does engage internationally. Both Corey and both AASHE and AASHE have conferences that bring people from other countries. So we do have international efforts, but in terms of like the people that are on our website every day, a lot of those folks are US and Canada. In the US, there's 4,000 institutions of higher education. AASHE, in the past 15, we're going on 16 years, we haven't yet surpassed 1,000 members. And our members, just like AASHE, is organizational. So it's not an individual, it's institution-wide. So we don't even yet have 25% of the US higher education sector as members. And yet, we have had a conference prior to, COVID, we had 2,400 people come into our annual conference. This year we had more than 7,000, almost 7,000 people at our virtual conference. So we have the scale is very different, just because there's so many higher education institutions in the United States, which is kind of a problem. But Adrienne, to get to your question, now that context is set, we haven't had exponential growth. And I only wish exponential growth in this case could just be tied to interest in sustainability. Because if that's the case, then yes. But the fact that it's tied to membership dollars, that means that automatically there's institutions that can't participate. And what I'd like to believe, and this is again just the US numbers, that the 3,000 institutions that are not yet a member of AASHE, I want to believe that the majority of those institutions and the leadership of those institutions are caring about climate change and about sustainability in general, and caring about their people and their communities. And yet there are institutions that are incredibly strapped for money and trying to figure out how to keep their doors open. So while there are certain institutions that, they are not prioritizing sustainability, I think there are others that are trying to figure out how do we do it all. And frankly, even within the members of AASHE, there's a huge spectrum of like the kind of the leaders of the pack, if you will, those that have 15 member teams, 15 staffers on their sustainability team. Those are a bit more of the anomalies. The typical sustainability program maybe is one person with like 2 to 4 student interns, right? Like that's sort of the makeup. And these are folks that are trying to look at the entire institution to say, how do we advance sustainability in every which way? So in any event, Adrienne, I just feel like that context is so important, because like the membership number in and of itself only tells you a very limited story. So as Corey alluded to, in the past year, really since COVID, we've definitely seen a little bit of a decline. But I mean, and this is where I'm like, everyone knock on wood, please, because it hasn't gotten awful yet. And I'm hopeful that we're all able to be okay this year. Because I do think last year we were all in like crisis mode and shifting into like, what do we need to do? And now it's like, what are things going to look like, just as higher education in general continues to have to reinvent itself and figure out what do things look like now.
I agree.
Wow.
That's this membership story.
Well, and that's so interesting, because it does lead into the question about like stakeholders and change agents. And you talked about almost 7,000 members or attendees at the virtual conference. And so, part of what I think the listeners CANIE does specifically content for practitioners of international within, the sector, mostly institutions. But when you think about like the main stakeholders that attend those conferences or that you do work with, and the three of you have such interesting perspectives, because like Corey, you've done both like acts and you're within an institution, and Meghan, you're not currently in an institution, and Adrienne, like in an institution, but kind of like dabbling like on a sustainability, like working with a sustainability committee. So I'm super keen to hear from sort of Meghan and Corey, and then also Adrienne, in terms of like, from the AASHE and AASHE perspective, who are your main stakeholders on these campuses? Is it just sustainability practitioners? Are they facility? Like, because I know, Corey, even your roles changed so much. So what does that look like, and what's the evolution look like? And have you seen like a little bit more of that international perspective?
Yeah, I think interestingly, I guess it started out as most institutions as an environmental compliance thing, which then became environmental management. So it became let's minimize our negatives to enhancing our positives around environmental and operational activities. And then that concept of many of us in that space are like, well, there's a bigger story here. It's called sustainability. So let's start calling it environmental sustainability. So people start to get the concept of there's these social elements and there's the financial, obviously, and then broaden it out to in fact, there's this whole model, if you think about it. It's a nested framework, and the SDGs grab it, and STARS grabs it, and the Life Index grabs it, and all this, where you just sort of have to evolve it. It's, at the end of the day, it's getting the right stakeholders from across the institutions, from across all those sustainability areas, finding the mission-based people, the passion-based people, and saying, how do we get together and tell this story as a group, from curriculum perspective, from a research perspective, from an operations, from our community engagement? How do we ensure the governance is then in place and get sustainability policies and strategies in place? And you just sort of keep building it, which is what I've done for 11 years here. Essentially, is started out, we had no recycling bins. There were 3 people in a university of whatever, we have 30-some thousand students that took things home from their tea rooms. Now it's, well, okay, let's get some recycle bins. Started out there, and now we're to this point where we want a gold stars rating, and gold stars says something, because that means you've got a holistic perspective. You're looking at it holistically, as you should. And that's empowering all those people across our institution and right into our, what used to be our global division. Then they were international. Now they're future students. They keep changing the name. But again, at the end of the day, it's what are we doing about student recruitment right now? International, yeah. When is it going to come back? How do we help it come back? Versus domestic, intrastate. How do we get people from the mainland to Tasmania, et cetera? But that idea of international students, that team was very on board and were very supportive. They're the ones that put me onto CANIE, where they said, there's this group starting that's focused on international education and dealing with climate change and carbon emissions reduction within the sector from international education. Can you get involved and find out what they're on about? And we'll pay to get you to WA to meet AASHE and have that conversation up on the podium. So that's how it all started. So very much proactive from within our international education group.
That's so fun. Thank you to our friends in Hobart who brought us together. I love exactly. That. That's so great. And Meghan, in terms of like trends that you've seen in the US, is it sort of similar?
Yeah, and I just want to share with listeners and maybe encourage them to go to our website, AASHE.org, and just search Sustainability Staffing Survey. So for the past X number of years, I forget how many, every couple of years, we basically survey anyone. You don't have to be an AASHE member, but put out a survey because we're trying to get sort of a sense of how the profession of sustainability in higher education is evolving. And I would say what Corey described is very similar to the States, like operational lens in the 80s and 90s, much more holistic starting in the 2000s. And certainly in the past 10 years, sort of a focus on sustainability. And I do think STARS and that holistic framework, because STARS, again, is looking at the entire campus, not just the built environment, every aspect of a campus, really. And I think that really helped to, again, broaden and deepen folks' understanding of sustainability. But I'd also just add, in addition to encouraging folks to check out that staffing survey and just to see the trends, perhaps you won't be surprised to hear that in the bulk of sustainability staff are white, primarily female, identify as female. And basically there's other stats in the survey that talks about like how many staffers are now part of an office and how some of the growth within an institution of like, oh, and now we got our second person, now we got our third person. So in any event, I share that because again, what's really interesting, and this isn't just because of our internal commitment to centering racial equity and social justice to everything that we do, but these are the dialogues that are happening on our member campuses, is what does diversity, equity, and inclusion look like within sustainability, within our institution? And actually, how do we even go deeper from diversity, equity, and inclusion? What does social justice actually mean? What does it look like within our institution? And I've been really heartened, to bring it back to your question, CJ, to see there are now positions that are called Sustainability and Equity Officer or Sustainability and Inclusion. So I think there's still a lot of words that are being used and some people have different understandings as to what that means. Or maybe each institution has a different idea of what that looks like and what that means at their institution. But point being is, just like Corey was describing how it used to be environmental management, and then it was like, no, now it's environmental sustainability, and now it's sustainability. I think the idea we're continuing to evolve the conversation, expand everyone's understanding of, guess what, racial equity and social justice is a part of sustainability. It is not separate from, you cannot disconnect people from planet. So in any event, I'm really, really excited to see a lot more conversations with diversity officers and sustainability officers on campuses. And I think there's huge opportunity for international ed folks and sustainability officers to create some really meaningful collaborations.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And when one of the things that, you know, we talk about all the time in climate action is there is no separating climate action from climate justice, because the intersection of people who have less access, systemic barriers to accessing international education and studying abroad, or are impacted by the emissions as a result. So the foundation of climate action is climate justice. And so we know that's sort of super powerful, and international having sort of that at its core in terms of creating global citizens, solving big global problems. So thank you both of you for saying that. Adrienne, being at an institution in an international office, and sort of, I'm super curious to share, sort of have your relationship with sustainability, and how that connects in with what Meghan and Corey were saying.
Before I get to that, I mean, when you're talking, just sparking like all of these ideas, like with the climate justice and international education, racial justice. It's like, if you look at, from the US perspective anyway, who typically goes abroad, it's, 70% white, mostly women. And those are the individuals flying with, all these emissions of greenhouse gases. But then who are the communities that are actually being impacted by the climate crisis now? They're not the same people. So I think that, it's not only an intersection, like these things are so intertwined, international education, racial justice, and the climate crisis, like they are, all kind of feeding on each other. So I'm so glad we're having these conversations.
And I will say, if you're listening to this before February 9th, make sure you register for our event about the intersection of international education and climate justice. And if you're listening after February 9th, it'll be on YouTube. So depending on when you're listening to this episode, we are addressing this at CANIE. We've got a 2-part CANIE Live event coming up on Feb 9 and 23rd. And so that will be, I think, a really important discussion. And it's really just gonna be scratching the surface, because it's so complex and touches everything that we're going on.
And sorry, Adrienne, before you go on, you touched on an elephant in the room there, is that carbon emissions from international travel, and how are we balancing all those benefits, from students traveling around the world and seeing different ways of living, et cetera, with that carbon emissions issue. So when I was out in Western Australia, I had some emissions to go there. So part of what I brought to the podium, on that with AASHE on the conversation, was the fact that the carbon emissions, a conservative estimate for all of those people attending that from all over the world. So this is an Australian International Education Conference, so people that were from Europe and South America, et cetera. We did a calculation. So my team and I, because we're a certified carbon neutral university, so we do our carbon inventory every year, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So we know the methodologies. We worked out conservatively from the capital cities of their country, not even getting to there, the carbon emissions from that 1 3-day conference was the equivalent, in other words, almost to the ton, of the carbon emissions from my entire university for a year. And we are a research intensive, island-based university where we have lots of people traveling as well and flying. So all of these conferences and all of these people moving around, massive impact. That's the elephant in the room. We need to support international education. How do we do that in a climate friendly way? Not just the climate justice, that is incredibly important, but an actual climate change, carbon emissions side of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We talk about that elephant, or talk about needing to address that elephant all the time. And hopefully the more we share about just exactly what you're talking about, right? Like the understanding this impact of the conference economy, right? And so I'm sure that's something that we'll hopefully address. And I know we've got a couple of episodes coming up about that specifically, but like I have to travel to conferences to do my job. So conferences have to lead. And so by saying, how are we going to be more mindful in reducing, right? To your point, Corey, it's not, there's the justice aspect, but if it is just, if the justice is there, but it's like bad for everybody, that doesn't really help. So there's all those different elements to it. So I do want to talk about that in the future. But so thank you for bringing that up, because it is something that like people don't really want to talk about in international. This is a sector that like loves traveling, and do I love this job? Do I love this job if I don't love traveling, if I don't get to travel as much? And is that the reality of what we're doing? And like, probably. And so there's a lot of,
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I feel like with a lot of international educators that I know, it's like part of our identity, it's like, and so when that is threatened, it's really scary, but we have to own up to it, and what does that mean for us? Yeah. But so to touch on your other question earlier about at my institution, kind of the work between the Sustainability Office and International Education, to date, not much has happened at all. Not to say that there aren't really passionate, engaged people in international education that live their lives in a way, where they clearly care about sustainability and their footprint. But I don't think there's been that intentional connection yet. Between international education and environmental sustainability. And the Sustainability Office, unfortunately, it falls into that category that I think Megan and Corey, you were talking about, where it's like, okay, there's one person and there's 5 interns, and we've had really the environmental sustainability push has really been driven by students, not by staff. And so students have been advocating, they're amazing people, and have been advocating recently for like a cabinet level position in sustainability to kind of oversee the entire campus, because we haven't had that. And so that wouldn't have happened without the students' advocacy and letter writing and getting and really being that convener, pulling people, staff and faculty members together to support the initiatives that they really have led.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I'm not surprised.
And we hear that all the time in international, right? Like, where do we begin? And even just having conversations with sustainability people at institutions, someone from a institution in British Columbia in Vancouver, where I live, has taught me a lot and was like, we didn't talk to people at international. Now that we're talking, I've gone over to them and made friends, and now conversations are happening. But that is like making that connection and facilitating that connection, like intentionally. International is a very powerful division within an institution, like a department within an institution. So they've got a lot of institutional power. And so there's a lot of good that can be done by wielding it in some institutions, depending on the structure. Sustainability might be out of the office of the president, and that has a lot of power. So it's like every institution has to navigate their power structure really differently, and not ever having been in an institution and not knowing one way or the other. It's like a fascinating, but also I can imagine like challenging and frustrating thing to like figure out and make move forward. So thank you to everyone doing that work and making those connections. Okay.
Yeah.
Adrienne,
so at CANIE, obviously our interest is international education and climate action, and those intersections, obviously, with racial justice, social justice work center. And so we're interested in hearing from you about some interesting projects or case studies that you've seen, or cases that you've seen in sustainability offices and international offices working together. So since you all have been doing this for so long, what can you share with us that maybe others can be inspired to enact on their campus?
Yeah, like a nice feel good, something to hope for and aim for.
Corey,
Megan, do you want to go first? There was some great STAR sessions that dealt with just that. UC Davis, I think, was one of them.
You might know more than I about this.
Okay.
I was actually just going to say that I think this is an area where we need to develop more case studies and examples. Because yes, I've been doing this work for a long time. Next month is my 12-year anniversary at AASHE, which is insane.
Wow.
But my point is, like, I don't know. And I think that's not because international ed isn't important. I think it's because both international ed folks and sustainability folks are overloaded. And it's like, oh, what else do you want me to do? What do I have to do? So in any event, I am absolutely sure, and Corey, you might even have some specific examples of like, oh, here's a great story. I just don't know them. And frankly, I was looking up at our Sustainable Campus Index, which is our annual report about STARS data that I encourage folks to check out. It's available for free. But even there's not a lot of specific to your question, about the international ed and sustainability. So for me, it's sort of exciting to be like, oh, well, what can we go find? But Corey, I'm curious just to hear both from ACTS members as well as even some sessions you might have heard of at AASHE.
Yeah, so I think in a way it's early days for that relationship. There's a few standout institutions that have been focusing on how does international contribute to sustainability, but also how does sustainability contribute to international's mission, and that's sort of what we've focused on here at the University of Tasmania and within ACTS, who is telling that story of what are student expectations? How can we drive a sustainability agenda within our member institutions to help deliver, the financial and the international enrollments and all of that? Because international students, in other words, students around the world, the surveys show, understand that there's value in sustainability. They demand it. So why is that not part of that marketing or information sharing that happens through international? Say, actually, we're doing some really great things, and in fact, Vice Chancellor, make sure that we're doing those great things and resource and support our sustainability people so that when the students get here, there's some authenticity. We were guilty of it in a way. There was a bit of greenwashing early on that I didn't know was happening, and we had students getting here going, well, what do you mean you don't even have organic waste management rolled out across your campuses? And I'm like, why were you expecting that? And they were like, oh, well, we were told that, UTAS is doing all these amazing things. I'm like, in fact, we're the worst performer in the sector in Australasia with our waste management, blah, blah, blah. And so I was very open about it. And I said, but this is what we're doing about it. We have a plan, da, 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 da. So I think it's really important that the two work closely together. If it is something that you're targeting in your students that you're trying to attract, make sure you're supporting it internally so that it can happen. And that's the story. So I want to say it was University of California, Davis did a STARS session at your conference where they talked very clearly about how that came together and how they're leading in that space. As far as I could tell, they're leading in that space. So check out which one. I'm hoping it was UC Davis, and Camille there is doing some amazing work with their international group as well. But there is a natural fit there. As far as a carbon emissions perspective, I've put forward that thought of, as part of our marketing initiative, do we say to students, we'll offset your emissions for one flight home a year as part of our certified carbon neutral status? That's part of a bundled package to get people here, but also then to ensure that our students are contributing to something that we say is important as being a certified carbon neutral organization. So I've not gotten very far with that yet, but those are the kind of things that we need to be pushing. And I think is addresses that earlier issue, the elephant in the room, Adrian, is how can we address this? And at the end of the day, it is a value to the planet for our students and a broader diversity and variety of students from around the planet doing it. Therefore, how do we minimize the negative impacts? And it might be we carbon offset, that we have sectoral projects that we just say international education is, funding a massive, solar array in Africa with, battery power and it's saving these emissions and make sure it's all methodologically sound and all of those. There's lots of opportunities in this space.
Wow, I love that. Given the natural fit of international ed offices and sustainability offices, And aside from the workload issues that you brought up, Megan, which I can absolutely relate with, what do you both think would be the major challenges for to having these offices working together? If it's such a natural fit, why do you think they don't come together more organically?
I think it's capacity. I think it's capacity. Yeah. I think it's just competing priorities. Right. And again, I don't have background or experience with international ed on campuses. So it's hard for me to know, like, it's like some huge institutions, are they just never even in the same, building or circles? So I don't know, it does bring me back to STARS, because STARS in my brain, and it's because when we launched, the director of sustainability at the time at American University in DC had said, oh, now I have an agenda for every department on campus. And yet, we've talked about this previously with some of the other folks at CANIE. I think there's some increased opportunities we have to reflect on. How could STARS help to benefit international ed folks to get the data that you need, et cetera? And how does at least STARS perhaps provide an opportunity to start a conversation between sustainability and international ed folks? But yeah, Adrienne, your point is it's an interesting question in terms of challenges. The two things that come to mind for me is capacity, even though you said besides capacity, and just competing priorities with just so many things going on. But Corey, what do you think?
Well, and that challenge, I agree completely with both of those. And I think the second in particular is an opportunity more than a challenge, and I've touched on it, is what do students expect? What makes your institution more appealing to what students expect to see? And therefore bringing a confluence to those prioritizations. But it's enabling that conversation, which touched back, Megan, what you said earlier, is we need more case studies, we need more exemplars that have done this, that have brought this together, and that's shared across the sector. And CANIE has a role to play in that, is finding those. So go to the conference program and find those and start sharing that and say, this international group at this university is working with their sustainability team, and this is what they're focusing on and how they're bringing those priorities of the two agendas together. Then it addresses the capacity issue in a way, and it addresses the prioritization and resource allocation issue.
That's great. And that's right. And we, you guys both mentioned the competing priorities, and we hear that a lot. And I think in the face of COVID and COVID recovery, we're hearing it even more. I can only speak to what I hear about in Canada, but the reliance on international students for revenue, and the need for recruitment, increasing international student numbers and making sure that we have that institutions have money coming in from international, which is where a lot of the power comes from within an institution. And sometimes the methods and operations for recruitment are the things that cause those emissions in terms of travel. And so it's like, what does that look like? And in the face of COVID, and I think that this is part maybe where we'll sort of wrap up the conversation. It's a nice opportunity, but in the face of COVID and potentially the risk of just going back to normal, when we've learned so much about how we're able to be effective and change the way we work, and the awareness of the impact, as we're all sort of at home, and the self-reflection. I'm super keen to hear from you both, maybe a couple things in the face of budget cuts, what you touched on it a little bit earlier, you guys have managed to hold on to a number of your membership because of how important this work is to the values of the institution members. But in terms of international office practitioners who do want to continue to take action on climate change, and perhaps not go back to what, talk about not going back to how things work, because how it was before wasn't working really for everyone. And so when we talk about a more just recovery for those international practitioners or on campus and campus sustainability practitioners, what would you say to them in suggesting how they might move forward as we maybe start crawling and approaching normalcy again?
Well, I'm thinking from the virtualization of higher education, of any education, actually, that has happened. For example, one of our member institutions is running a course in, it's a governance level course through their business school. They asked me as ex-president to come and present, what's actually similar to this in a way. We had students enrolled at that university in Australia from Brazil, Greece, Turkey, all over. There were people from all over the world that were international students participating in a very diverse, interesting way. Africa was there, South America, and it was fantastic. Those are international enrollments. Did the student need to fly to that institution? Nope. But boy, it sure opened up some possibilities.
Yeah, I guess a few different things come to mind for me. Number one, I guess I would encourage folks, international ed, as well as sustainability folks, even just like an introduction of like, we should have coffee. And if it's virtual, if it's Zoom coffee, whatever that looks like. And I would recognizing there's so much going on. There's so many to-dos put upon, staffers and faculty in higher education institutions. So how do we sort of set out some reasonable things like, hey, let's just have some conversation. Let's talk about our goals, see where there's some mutual alignment. And I would also say that this is where AASHE, our perspective, believe it or not, we've created the STAR system to provide guidance and parameters for sustainability in higher education, but we're not overly prescriptive in this is how you do this. This is exactly what this looks like, which means every campus is going to be able to get your experts together, the international ed folks, sustainability folks. You guys are going to figure out the plan. I just think you should get together and at least start that conversation. Sure, like Corey and I said, definitely getting some examples of like, well, what's happening elsewhere? And like, oh, well, what does STAR say? Or who's doing what? I think certainly that's a starting point, but just recognizing that I think there's benefit even just starting the conversation. And I guess my positive framing is thinking about last year, if every higher education institution, let's say in North America and Australasia, said in January, everyone needs to teach remotely from now on, that would not have happened. And everyone would have laughed and that would have been like, no way. So basically, what felt impossible became reality within a matter of weeks, right? So I frame that thinking like, yeah, the next 9 years are critical in terms of us saving planet and saving so much of civilization and humanity. And we've already experienced something that we thought was impossible that became reality. So I think while, yes, there's a lot going on in terms of international ed to-dos, sustainability to-dos, and when we think about what is going to be the best use of our time so we have the biggest impact possible, it seems like those two groups should talk, right? So trying to figure out how that conversation starts, and perhaps those listening today can just sort of say, I can reach out, I can have a conversation. But then I do think participation, I think CANIE should be doing sessions at the AASHE conference and at the AASHE conference this year, right? I think sharing, here's what's possible, sharing some of those recommendations, those strategies for what's working well, even though we like to say what's perfect, what hasn't worked well. Let's talk about that. I mean, again, a lot of what we're doing here, and Corey, you framed this earlier, we are we're trying to do less bad, but what does it actually look like for us to thrive, for international ed and sustainability to thrive? Let's also envision that. So I just, I'm the impatient optimist, like so many other sustainability folks, and just really feel like the COVID pandemic, the global pandemic, as devastating and heart-wrenching as it continues to be and has been, with such devastation of loss, I think there is such value in what we've learned from it and how we can actually face the sustainability crisis. So in any event, those are some of my encouraging words to try and get folks to talk more on campus.
I think that's, a year in which we kind of discovered that what we thought was impossible is actually quite possible, in our human capacity to transform how all our habits, the way we worked, the way we connected. I think we learned a lot. And I think when you were saying that, Adrienne's puppy agreed. And so I think that was...
Dogs often agree with my perspective. Mine does all the time.
Puppies know what's up, right? They're trusting. So I just think that's like a super beautiful way and a super beautiful perspective on like what is arguably a pretty devastating, what is like actually not arguably like just a devastating sort of global crisis. And if some good can come from it is our sort of ability to transform, and that like imagining what we still think is impossible in the face of what we thought and realized was not, like our capacity to solve these big problems on a global scale sort of does create this like sense of hope and optimism that you talked about. So I think that that's a really beautiful way. And, CANIE, I will say here and now, we take responsibility for hearing stories, and we want to hear from, and I think something in international is people maybe don't think that what they're doing is remarkable, but because we're not all super familiar with it. And so just starting to have those conversations to see what other people are doing and seeing how you fall into that. And so, dear listener, if you have a case study that you would like to share with us, find us on Twitter or Instagram, or send us an email from our website. And we want to share those stories, and we want to build a massive database and tell those stories. And it was, UC Davis, Corey, you're right, does a lot of really great work there. And so being able to sort of showcase some best practices is that, like, we will take on that responsibility at a global level. And I think this conversation has been just super inspiring. And so I hope that people who have listened appreciate it as much as I have. So thank you so much to all of you.
Such a delight to be here and talk with you all.
It has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast is engineered by Diego Mendez, who is based in Vancouver. He edits these episodes together, making us look and sound super professional. And also, he uploads these episodes to wherever you listen or watch this podcast.